You want to divide a room full of feminists? Talk about sex work or pornography. That'll split the room in a hurry.
Sex work is not work, and Western feminists love to say sex work is work, but prostitution is sex exploitation of underage girls and women.
When she commented that, talking about how prostitutes are to blame for men's behavior, it did more than piss me off. What it actually did was highlight for me, or like remind me of a really prevalent thought process amongst both men and women and even children, which is that women are somehow responsible for controlling the way that men behave. And I hate that shit.
Every few years, feminists have the same argument. Pornography and sex work. Is it empowering or is it exploitation? And depending on who you ask, the answer is either it's empowering or it's violence. But I think both those answers are missing the point. So we're going to talk about that. Before we get started, you know what to do. Love or hate, like and share, because the algorithm does not care. I started thinking about this after receiving an email from a subscriber who was asking me about a TV show called Margot's Got Money Troubles. This show is about a young single mother who turns to OnlyFans to pay her bills. Not for fun, not for empowerment, but because she needs money. And that's where this conversation actually gets interesting. I haven't watched the show yet. I think, in fact, it just dropped today as I'm recording this. I don't have a moral panic about pornography and sex work that some feminists do, but I also don't think that it's inherently empowering either, because I don't think any line of work or any type of labor is inherently empowering. But you know what is empowering? Money. Money is empowering. Not having to depend on a man for money is empowering. Being what Ashanti Bendeldu, aka the unpunishable woman, calls a well-resourced woman, that is empowering. And if women are the people doing the labor, they should be the ones who are getting paid. Let's start with a definition. What is sex work? Sex work is the exchange of sexual services, performances, or sexually explicit content for money or material compensation. It includes a broad range of activities where sexuality is the primary commodity being sold, including, but not limited to, prostitution or escorting, stripping and exotic dancing, pornographic performance, phone sex, cam work, and content creation on platforms like OnlyFans. Its key features are the fact that it is labor-based, time, performance, emotional, and physical effort. It's transactional. Compensation is explicit or implied, and it exists on a spectrum from independent work to highly controlled or mediated industries. Another important distinction is that sex work is a labor framework. The term was popularized to shift the conversation away from the morality and towards workers' rights, workers' safety, and economic conditions. Now, what is pornography? Pornography is media created with the primary intention of sexually arousing an audience. Prurient interests, as the Supreme Court called it. It includes film and videos, photographs, written or audio content, digital and subscription-based content. It is produced for consumption, not just participation. It is mediated content. It's recorded, distributed, and viewed. Its defining purpose is arousal. So sex work is the labor and economic activity. Pornography is the product or media output. So a cam model is doing sex work. The content that she produces is pornography. Get it? The distinction is important because a lot of the feminist debate collapses these two things into one. And I think that's where some of the confusion happens. Because you can critique pornography as a cultural product, what it depicts, who it centers, etc., while still defending sex workers as laborers who deserve rights, safety, and fair compensation. Let's start with the case against pornography and sex work. The critique by radical feminists like Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon weren't primarily focused on the labor. They were focused on the product, the content. Their argument was that pornography as a form of media usually centers male pleasure, normalizes dominance and control, eroticizes inequality, etc. And when you look at mainstream porn, you can see why they said that. Because the question isn't just what is happening on screen, it's who is this for? And most of the time, pornography reflects a very specific script of gender and power. They also challenge the idea of choice, because if someone enters an industry due to economic pressure, lack of opportunity and resources or coercion, then calling that empowerment is incomplete at best, and at worst, it's just dishonest. You cannot separate choice from the conditions that shape it. Now let's look at the opposing argument. Sex-positive feminists like Gayle, Rubin, and myself are not primarily defending pornography as a product. We're defending the right to fair labor. Our argument is that women should have control over their bodies, their sexuality, their time, and their income. And historically, women have been denied control of all of those things. So when women choose to monetize sexuality, the immediate response shouldn't be shame. It should be, do they have control over the process? Are they safe? Are they being compensated fairly? And this is where platforms like OnlyFans changed the conversation a lot. Because for the first time, women could produce their own content, set their own terms, keep a larger share of the profit. That doesn't make the system perfect, but it does shift the balance of power significantly. Have you noticed that men never had an issue with sex work and pornography like they have today? And the only change in pornography and sex work is that women have the ability to independently monetize it. And suddenly, it's a problem for men. Curious.
I think prior to OnlyFans, men were the first people to defend sex work and the sexualization of women. I remember being like 10 years old and going to my older brother's dorm room, and his roommate had this poster above his bed, which was a very popular meme in guy culture at the time, which was this homely looking feminist holding a sign outside of a Hooters that says, women are not decoration. And then beside her, a bunch of hot Hooters girls holding a sign saying some. And the joke was supposed to be like, oh, the feminist is just too ugly to be a Hooters girl. So she's protesting it. And I was like a very viral meme that people would make all the time when women would tell their boyfriends and husbands like, hey, I actually don't feel comfortable with you like jerking off to other women while we're dating. They would say like, well, you're just insecure, this is controlling, it's purely physical. Like they were the first to adopt the utmost amount of levity when it came to sex work and engaging with it, and just tell their girlfriends that it's meaningless, it's just purely physical, and that they're overthinking it. But as soon as women started turning like 7 figures off of OnlyFans and going on podcasts and bragging about all the rappers in their DMs, the fact that they're buying houses off of it, now men have this like victim mindset, and now they're talking about like the erosion of the social fabric and how it's the fall of the West. And I just think it's interesting because it was literally a rite of passage for so many men. Like days before you get married, you go see a stripper, right? So I would agree that it's 100% like a financial envy.
Because historically, the problem wasn't actually sex work. It was who owned it and the circumstances in which that person entered into sex work. This is where I land, because I think focusing on the product of sex work, pornography, misses the bigger picture. Sex work is work. It's physical, emotional, performative, psychological, and like any other form of labor under capitalism, it can be exploitative, or it can offer a degree of autonomy. Because to survive in a capitalist system, you need money, quite a bit of it. Those are two different realities. Studio pornography historically has been about centralized control, profit extraction, limited worker autonomy, but direct-to-consumer models are different. But they are still operating inside a system where platforms take a substantial cut of your profits, algorithms control the visibility of your content, and income depends on demand. So even when sex work is empowerment from an economic perspective, as in you are earning your own money, it's still happening inside a system that was never designed to empower women. Here's what I think is the disconnect in this conversation with anti-sex work feminists. They're collapsing sex work and pornography into the same thing. And then they're shaming the workers. But sex workers are not just participants in this system. They are observers of it. Sex workers know and understand more about male behavior, more about misogyny and patriarchy than the rest of us ever will. They see male desire without the filter, the gap between what men say they want and what they actually want, the gap between who they think they are and who they really are. They see the performance of masculinity up close and personal.
The reason why sex workers are such a threat to the patriarchy and misogynists is because they've dropped all pretense. They see directly to the soul of patriarchy.
I love the fact that I can tell you guys that I know so much about men because I spent 20 years as a stripper. That's right, my loves, 20 years not only studying social sciences, but observing men in a habitat where they have no pretenses. When these guys go to the strip club, they're not there to get judged, and they know that, so they let it all fly. You know those married men who were cheaters? They're not ashamed of that in the strip club. You know those good men who are just lonely, they work really hard, long hours, and they want some companionship? They don't hide that either. I've seen it all and everything in between. So I learned more about men in my 20 years of stripping than just about any therapist you'll have in front of you. Because I sat on their laps while they whispered in my ear the things they won't tell a therapist. Those things they're hiding from you because they're trying to get in bed with you, I heard those too. So if you want expert advice on how to tell the difference between a selfish short-term thinker and a generous long-term thinker, how to tell the difference between somebody who's going to cheat on you and somebody who'll be loyal and trustworthy, talk to the women who know.
That is insight. And I think it is some of the most valuable insight we have. And when feminists shame or exclude sex workers from the movement, it's not dismantling patriarchy. It's actually reinforcing the idea that women's sexuality is something to be controlled and judged, that there are women who are deserving of rights and those who are not. I can hardly think of anything more patriarchal than that. Side note, the problem with sex work really lies in how we treat sex workers. And not just in terms of the labor, which is what I'm primarily focusing on here, and the compensation, but in terms of how men interact with sex workers.
In countries where this work is decriminalized, workers can go to the police if a client takes off a condom during a booking. They can go to the police if a client refuses to pay. Decriminalization lowers rates of violence against sex workers, and it also lowers rates of things like STIs.
I personally would not treat a sex worker any differently than I would treat a barista at Starbucks. I wouldn't haggle over the price of a latte. I'm there to receive a product and a service. The price is clearly listed of what that service or product is. I either pay the price for that service or product, or I take my business elsewhere. But when men interact with sex workers, they're always trying to get something free. It's the entitlement. It's the idea that I am entitled to a woman's body, and how dare you ask me to pay for the privilege. And by the way, just like Chantal was saying, how someone behaves at a strip club is who they are. Because if you are respectful and kind to the group of people that patriarchy tells you that you're allowed to abuse, whores, then you're going to be respectful to all women. If you treat one group of women one way and one group another way, that clearly means that you are buying into this idea that there are some women that are good, moral, and righteous, and some women that are not, and that you can treat the non-virtuous women any way you want.
A lot of the time, sex workers see they're on the cliff edge of male behavior and male nature. They are. They don't have to manipulate. They don't have to chase. They don't have to wait years to get anything from a man. That's not how it works. And if you are also naive to believe that the difference between you and them is that that man will respect you and not them, you'd be mistaken. Because actually, the main users of a platform like OnlyFans are men. And actually, literally a majority of the male users on OnlyFans are married. When you actually listen to the stories and experiences of sex workers, they're doing more than just physical labor. Okay? There's conversation. There's company. Believe it or not. This is why I always say to women, when you think you're better than another woman, a woman who lives a certain lifestyle, who's in a certain line of work, not when it comes to men, you're not. And so I find it interesting when women still, in this day and age, still look down on sex workers. And like I said, you don't have to agree with their choices. But one thing they do know about often more vividly than the good and respectable woman that society has trained you to be, is male nature.
And that's what the sex workers see. That's what Chantal, 20 years in the strip club, that's what she saw. And by the way, the man that was respectful to the sex workers in that establishment, one of those men, that is how he treats women everywhere. He behaved the same way in the strip club as he does outside of the strip club. And one of those guys that was respectful in the strip club and outside of it, she married him. Like it or not, sex workers understand men in a way that most women don't. So instead of asking, is pornography good or bad? Or is sex work good or bad? We should be asking, who controls the labor? Who owns the platform? Who is profiting? Because pornography and sex work both exist inside of two systems at the same time, patriarchy and capitalism. And both of those systems shape what kind of content gets produced, who produces it, and who profits from it. The real problem is not sex. It's power. Who has it, who doesn't, and who gets paid. So when we argue about whether sex work or pornography is empowering or exploitive, we're actually asking the wrong question. The question is not, is pornography feminist or is sex work feminist? The question is, under what conditions could it be? Control of labor, control of platform, who keeps the money? Because if women are performing the labor and someone else is extracting the value, that's not empowerment. That's just another industry doing exactly what every other industry does: exploit its labor force. And until we're honest about that, we're going to keep having the same conversation over and over again. Thanks for watching. See you next time. If you enjoy this kind of content, I invite you to watch my series, Witches, Whores, and Rebels, a feminist history of patriarchal capitalism and how to burn it down. It's a 3-part series with a 90-page companion guide that gives you the history of how we got here, centering the witch hunts, women's resistance, and providing a framework for how we move forward from here. The link is in the description when you're ready.